Welcome to episode 156 of The Route. The Route is a glorified coffee chat and podcast form that takes you from A to B with a new guest every episode. I'm your host, Christopher Nascimento, as always, and let's get started. Before we get into today's podcast, just a couple things to cover. First, if you haven't already, take the time to follow, subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. If you're watching us on YouTube right now, you can find us at the Routecast there, or you can find us on all audio platforms. So that's Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google, so on and so forth. I believe there's about 10 or so audio platforms, so we should be on 11 with YouTube. So check us out there, rate 5 stars, allows the podcast to grow just a little bit easier. And then on that note as well, similarly to the YouTube account at the Routecast, you can find us at that handle on all social media platforms, and that includes LinkedIn. And the reason I mention that is just in regards to the context of the podcast, the things we're discussing, the people we have on. It's a great way to start your network, grow your network, maintain it. You can find myself and every guest on those posts there. And then you can kind of follow along with what episode is coming out that week. So check us out at the Routecast on all social media platforms. If you need a reminder throughout the episode and you're watching on YouTube, you can see at the top hand corner here, it says at the Routecast. So with that now said, let's get into today's guest. Today's guest is brought to you by Zoom. In the world of partnerships, there's a simple principle. You adapt or you die. In this fast-paced industry, you can't afford to miss a beat. And that's where Zoom will help you win each and every time. Zoom provides premier real-time data insights for partnerships across broadcast, streaming, and social like no one else. They're always ready and detailed analytics help you get the upper hand and save time in your day-to-day reporting. So if you're ready to upgrade your reporting today, make the smart choice and choose Zoom. With that, today's guest. I'd now like to welcome someone who has made a career out of leveraging strategic thinking to deliver marketing and communication strategies to build brands. The current brand manager at Invest in Canada, Danny Starr. Welcome to the Route. How's it going?
Great, Chris. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we touched on it a bit before the podcast, but very interested in the role you currently have and how you got there. So, as the podcast name states, take us through your route. Where did it begin and how did you get to where we are today?
Well, I think to start, we have to go all the way back to 1995.
Perfect.
Back in 1995 was when I started my first year of university at Mount Allison University. And what was really interesting about that time in Mount Allison at that time was it was the first university in Canada that was wired direct to server in every room in the university. So I very vividly remember the first time that I saw the internet in the fall of 1995. I remember very vividly what Yahoo looked like at that time. This is before even search engines, when you would sort of use portals, Yahoo being the most popular at that time. And they would have sort of collections of links, and you could use that to be able to access the content that you want. There was not even a huge amount of content on the web at that time. But that's what sort of started getting me interested in it. And of course, like I lived in residence, so I had a computer. The internet was a lot faster than dial-up. So it was really, I was really lucky to be in some ways at the right place at the right time. Mount Allison's a really small school, maybe 1,005 to 2,000 undergrad students at that time. I think my whole commerce class was something around 110, 20 students or something. So it was pretty small. So, you know, I was getting involved in the internet pretty early, experiencing it. And I remember getting interested in marketing because I read a Harvard Business Review article in like about 1995, 96 or something, one of the early marketing classes we were in the commerce program. And that article, I actually have it up on the screen here. And I read it. I read it every few years. I sort of come back to it because I very vividly remember reading that article. At that time, it was talking about sort of the rise in sort of new marketing techniques and a sort of reorientation of marketing around the customer and the customer's needs. And there was just so much about that article that really spoke to me. It obviously just made sense that you would be focused on the needs and meeting the needs of your target market and sort of meeting them where they are, and using some of the new emerging techniques in order to be able to do that. And so within the commerce area, at Mount Allison University, I started to focus a lot more on marketing. I really liked that marketing allowed me to be able to sort of use two parts of the brain. Like one, it's sort of the creative side, and two, it's the analytical side. And I always tell people that that's one of the greatest things about marketing is there's not a lot of jobs that I think you can do that allow you to sort of be artistic and analytical, right? At the same time, it allows you to sort of be strategic and think big picture and think long term, and then execute on a daily basis. So I sort of have always loved those dichotomies about marketing. And so I did a lot of marketing and finance when I was at Mount Allison University. When I graduated, I moved to Toronto. I started in customer service at TD Securities. I started a little bit in the finance side. But you know what's funny about starting out in customer service at a self-serve brokerage firm in the early 2000s is that was really when like day trading, self-serve brokerage, online brokerage, all that sort of stuff was really first starting to take off. Um, Getting involved there, the demand for customer service reps, like to get us on the phone, it was like 2 hours. I remember there was an RSP season early in my career where there was just such a crushing volume of calls of people coming through. Every call I took all day for months was somebody who had waited 2 hours or more to get on the phone with me. And the people would get on the phone and they would just chew you out. And what's funny about that is that I learned right then and there how to deal or sort of diffuse people that are upset. And the crazy part about that is that skill is something that's helped me through like my entire career. So while sometimes you might think that customer service at a self-serve brokerage has no application to what it is you do later, some of the things that I learned in that early job have really served me well throughout my career. So I'm working, it's the early 2000s. I'm working I started at CT Securities. They got bought by TD. So we became like TD Canada Trust or TD Securities or whatever. I was working there for a little bit. And that was when a friend of mine who I knew from Mount Allison University, who was in my group for a number of marketing projects in the undergrad program, he called me and said, you know, I started working at this email service provider, so called Flow Network. And it was wild. It was probably, I think, around 2002 or so at that time. So Flow Network was one of the really early email marketing platforms. This was so early. This was at a time when you had to, you'd have the text email, the HTML email, and you'd have to sort of manually create the AOL formatted email. So back in the days of AOL mail, they had their own format. I worked with a lot of really big clients. Because Flow Network ended up getting bought by DoubleClick. DoubleClick, as a lot of people may know, was eventually purchased by Google. Anyways, DoubleClick's main business was ad serving, but at the time they were rounding out their services, so they bought Flow Network, and Flow Network became part of DoubleClick, and we were sort of their email marketing division. Through that, I was able to get exposure to some pretty major US clients, people like Omaha Steaks, WeightWatchers.com. And then towards the end of the time, so I think in about the 2003, 2004 range, I was working with one client, and that was BarnesandNoble.com, which at the time was the single biggest email marketing client they had at DoubleClick. They were sending somewhere in the league of 30 million email marketing messages a week. So it was pretty big. There was a lot of like data processes and stuff along those lines. got to spend a lot of time in New York. It was really fun. That was a really wild ride. Then what ended up happening was in about '03 area was when there was like that dot-com crash, and everything went from being all about managing revenues. So it used to be in the early part of the dot-coms, it was all about revenues, revenue growth, grow revenue no matter what it costs. All of a sudden, after the dot-com crash, it became all about managing profit. And if anybody knows anything about business, managing revenue and managing profit are two totally different things. So it was a very challenging time because, the business was attempting to get control of its costs and everything like that. The product was a bit buggy. It was a really, really challenging. Like the last year that I was at DoubleClick was really challenging. And so I had an opportunity to go and teach English go and teach English in South Korea. Basically, I knew a bunch of people that were teaching English in South Korea at the time. So I basically quit, sold everything I owned in mid 2004 and moved to Daegu, South Korea, and taught English for a year. And again, you would wonder, what is it? How can you go from doing what you were doing at DoubleClick, handling some of the biggest email marketing clients, to teaching English in South Korea? And you know what? It was a really great opportunity. I had a lot of fun. I've always loved working with kids. I grew up I taught tennis. I was a ski coach. I was a camp counselor, very involved with kids. So I had a blast. Um, and I also learned a lot of really valuable lessons being an English teacher in South Korea. There, they don't communicate change well. I guess they don't want to, for cultural reasons, they don't want to disappoint you or whatever. So it wasn't uncommon when you were teaching English in South Korea to be handed a book in a class and just be like, here, go teach. So it really taught me how to really think on my feet, how to adapt to change, which I think was like the right lesson for me to learn at the right time. So I taught English in South Korea for a year, moved back to Toronto. At that point, I'm back in Toronto. I connect with some people that I had been working with or was familiar with from DoubleClick that had moved to different places. And that's where I started working at Wonderman. And Wonderman, Lester Wonderman, as you know, some people may know, is known for having coined the term direct marketing back in like the 50s or 60s or something like that. Anyways, Wonderman is part of the Y&R group of companies. And what I did at that time was Microsoft, which was smart when you think about it from their side at this time. So this is like 2005, 2006 timeframe. What Microsoft did that was really interesting was they took their global business and split it evenly between two of the big agency groups, like the McLaren group of companies and the Y&R group of companies, so that they wouldn't have all their eggs in one basket. And they sort of split the business up in two ways. But because of the fact that that Microsoft operates globally, they had the foresight in 2006 to set up what they called the Email Center of Excellence. So because I had a lot of experience in email marketing, they set up this sort of central group, small group of people. There was only like two of us at Wonderman, and there was two people over in the McLaren group of companies. And we actually worked together across, agency parent companies or whatever on this Email Center of Excellence. And the job was to sort of like set standards for email marketing within the agency network, migrate everybody onto a common tool, and set up like a standardized reporting process so that we could assemble all of the data from all of Microsoft's global email marketing efforts and generate like benchmarks and learnings that we could then disseminate back through the agency network and through the Microsoft network that would help them do email marketing better. We were focusing there, I think, on like G20 countries or 25 countries or something. So we were interacting with the agency network in all of these countries, training them, sharing knowledge, and everything like that. And it was a really, really fantastic experience. Um, um, Everybody I worked with was super fantastic. I learned so much about, um, you know, doing marketing on a global scale, or how you would sort of execute marketing on a global scale. Learned a lot about sort of process and reporting standardization, data analysis, generating benchmarks, built like tools in order to be able to analyze benchmarks. And it was an absolutely fantastic experience. But as I started to head into about 2007 timeframe, um, I've been doing a lot of work in email marketing at that point. I wanted to be able to do more. I wanted to be able to do other, elements of marketing. Um, and I had an opportunity to go and do my MBA. And when I was looking for MBA programs, I wanted something that had a lot of international business to it, right? Because I'd had a lot of experience in global business. Um, and I wanted a school that had a really like diverse, rounded student body, so that I could learn from the other people in my classes and in my groups. Because um, if you're going to do an MBA, which not a lot of people necessarily do, specifically kind of in the marketing vein, it's important to be not the smartest person in the room, because you want to be able to learn from your classmates. And these programs are often even set up that way. You only really learn so much in class. You actually learn a lot from the people that are around you. And so I ended up choosing to go to UBC. UBC, what was interesting about the UBC MBA program at that time was the UBC MBA program was um, had a really big sort of corporate social responsibility element to it. And we'll come back to that a little bit more later, but that's where I started to first get this exposure, or this idea that you could take like hardcore business skills or business thinking and apply that to doing good in the world, or delivering benefit to people, right? And at the same time too, it allowed me to be able to experience almost every different aspect of business, because the UBC MBA program has a 3-month period um, called the core at the start of the program, where you do like all of the different disciplines, like accounting, finance, human resources, supply chain, like you name it. You learn like a little bit of everything. And then there's like a capstone project that sort of brings it all together. And that was really a great opportunity for me, just to see if there was something else I might want to be um, interested in and might want to pursue when I finished the program. But oddly enough, when it ended up happening was it sort of solidified my love of marketing, because I got a chance to really dive into a lot of different areas of marketing. We were able to do market research projects, statistics, like so analyzing data, all those sorts of things. And it was really fun time. It was really demanding. And so I'm in Vancouver. Um, it's like 2008 at this time frame. Uh, because I'd worked with a lot of technology clients, I was still really interested in technology. Um, and if there was and I was very laser focused, I wanted to stay in Vancouver. I wanted to work in marketing. So, um, when you look back at your career, it's always chance encounters and things. Like, you never know where something is going to lead. And I remember taking a class with a bunch of people in the part-time program. And I wasn't generally somebody that would socialize outside of class too much and stuff like that. But a bunch of the people that are in the part-time program, so these are people that are working during the day and then going to do their MBA at night over the course of a few years. Um, the part-time students that were in the class with me said, we're going to go for beers after class. Like, do you want to go? And I said, sure. And I went and we got to talking, and we didn't have a lot of contact with those students. So it was great to sit down and talk to them. And somebody that was there asked me, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I want to stay in Vancouver. I want to do like all aspects of marketing, and I want to do it with like a technology sort of software company. And she said to me, my husband works at a software company that's looking for a marketing manager right now. You should talk to them. And so I was looking for an internship for the summer. So I reached out to the company, started talking to them. And lo and behold, instead of getting an internship offer, I ended up getting an offer for a full-time marketing manager job. So I jumped on that opportunity and did it as like an internship for the summer or whatever, but then transferred to the part-time program for the final part of my MBA. So actually was able to be working full-time, had a job while I was doing my MBA. Now, this is 2008. So as all of this is going down, this is when the second big economic shock of my career came in. And this was like the big like housing crisis in the States, right? So like the entire financial market melted down, right? The software company I was working for, called Laplink Software, is well known, still exists today. I think it's been around like 30 years or something. It's one of the older software companies, I believe, in Seattle. PC Mover allows you to be able to move file settings and applications from one PC to another. But as you may see, right, there's a huge like credit crunch, cash crunch. The entire economy sort of melts down. So people aren't really buying new computers. Companies aren't buying new computers. Uh, uh, um, it's a difficult time selling product. And the entire marketing team for Laplink's based out of Seattle, was based out of Vancouver. So they closed the Vancouver office at that time. So right around the time that I'm finishing my MBA, Laplink's closing the Vancouver office, and I have no job. And at that point, I figured, well, maybe I'll move back to Ottawa. I grew up here. I can move back to Ottawa, you know, see if I'm going to move back to Toronto. I wasn't sure necessarily where I wanted to work for the next phase of my career. So I moved back to Ottawa. That was when I ended up meeting my wife. So inevitably it gets to this point where like, okay, I'm going to be staying in Ottawa and I have to find a job. I have no network, even though I grew up here. I spent most of my time to date working in Toronto and Vancouver. So it's like 2009, 2010. I have no network to speak of, but, I have all of these skills, networking skills, all those sorts of things. Social media is sort of taking off at that time. I had started a blog while I was doing my MBA, used that to sort of learn about SEO, sort of early blogging, sort of at that point. Started to get active on social media on my own so I could figure some of these things out and stay current with my skills. And I went to one networking event a week for probably a year and a bit. And I've heard this statistic a few times, right? That if you're out there looking for a job, it can take upwards of 150 contacts to get a job offer. And in my experience, I don't think that's entirely untrue, right? I met a lot of people, built a really strong network of people in Ottawa. Many of them are still friends of mine today. If you know anything about the marketing community in Ottawa, it's pretty small and tight knit. We all either know each other or know somebody that knows the person that we know. I got to know a lot of people. In the process of doing that, I met a recruiter who really liked me. And I will say something about recruiters. I tend not to have great relationships with recruiters, or I find a lot of them can be sort of transactional, but there's some great recruiters out there. And I ended up just happening to meet one who was really great. Doug Tessner is his name. He went on to work for Shopify. He was working at like Ogden Bernstein at the time or whatever. Doug, great guy, really liked him. We really hit it off. But I remember him saying, I really like you for this one job opportunity. Like, I really like you, and I would like you for this job opportunity, but you're just not senior enough, and I don't think the client would hire you. But so I kept in contact with him. And what ended up happening was I ran into him almost a year later at a networking event. And he was like, great to see you again. I was like, great to see you, whatever. And he's like, do you have a job? And I was like, no, I'm still looking. And he's like, I was talking to somebody at a software company just the other day that needs somebody. And 2 weeks later, I had a job. So again, like, luck and fate sort of meet at the same time, and networking and, keeping up to date with people pays off. And the name of that company was iWatch Life. This was iWatch Life is a video monitoring company. Their main sort of point of differentiation was better motion detection, more accurate motion detection. Prior to around that time frame, there was a few companies working on that in that space or whatever, Dropcam being one of them that got bought by Google and ended up being Google's home security system. But the market just wasn't ready for better motion detection at the time. Like, most people hadn't even really experienced bad motion detection, so they didn't know what some of the common problems were. Things like a leaf blowing through your backyard would be the same as an intruder. So you might be getting all of these like false notices and stuff like that. So I worked there for a while, but I had always kept the stuff that we'd talked about at UBC about corporate social responsibility in the back of my head. And I was volunteering on the board of directors of a nonprofit at the time that refurbished computers and donated them back into the community. So I always had that, community building, nonprofit-y type thing in the background. And then I met the two women, Krista and Heather, that owned Boomerang Kids, which at the time was a small network of children's resale stores here in Ottawa. And what was so great about Krista and Heather was they had both come from consulting backgrounds. And I think much like me, they had always had this desire to apply like a rigorous and serious strategic lens to a business that helped people turn the kids' clothing they didn't want and toys and equipment that they didn't want need anymore into cash they could use for other things, right? Keep it from going to landfill. What didn't get sold would get donated. And it was really my first experience working inside a company that was a real living, breathing, profitable, fast growing company that did good. And it was a fantastic experience. I started at the point in time at which they were turning it into a franchise. We opened like 4 stores in something like 6 months to a year. It was absolutely wild. We launched an integrated in-store and online shopping system that would allow you to be able to shop the same inventory in the store that you could online, which at the time was like pretty groundbreaking. We were pretty sure at the time we were the only resale franchise in the entire world that had a system like that. It took a lot of effort to get that off the ground, but it was very forward thinking. It was really fun. We had a really great time. The issue, though, was that as anybody who's had any exposure to franchise business will know, it takes a lot of money and a lot of effort to sort of build and grow a franchise. I mean, if you're selling franchises, you're out there competing with Subway, any of the hundreds of thousands of food franchises that exist. So growth was a little bit tough. A lot of money had been invested in the e-commerce and the in the e-commerce and franchise growth side. And in 2015, there was a bit of a period of time where the auto economy, particularly, there's a lot of layoffs in the public sector. So there's another sort of economic hit. The auto economy, which is always steady and generally always growing at a specific rate, started to sort of go sideways for a little bit, as there was a little bit of uncertainty and softness in the auto economy. And what that meant was that growth sort of slowed, and a lot of the projections were based on a much different growth rate. So I went to work for myself for a little while, started volunteering on the board of directors of a seniors home called Abbeyfield House, which is sort of a communal living type place for seniors. It's based on a model popular in the UK specifically, where the seniors will have communal meals, but then have their own like bed sitting room that they could sit in. So I was really busy at that time with that. I also had my first kid at that time. So then actually I ended up being able to combine all of my experience at sort of nonprofits and everything. I was the director of marketing strategy at Cyan Solutions, and Cyan Solutions been around, I think, probably close to 30 years now. There's a number of agencies like Cyan in Ottawa that do a lot of work with nonprofits and associations. And I was the director of marketing strategy there, developing campaign strategies and executing campaigns for people like the Canadian Real Estate Association, Lung Association, did some pretty big national work. Did the branding and launch of a cabinet door company called Swedish Door, and also did the branding and launch of the food hall downtown called Queen Street Fair, which at the time uh, um, was the, as best as we could tell, probably even in the world, the only food hall that was a combined food hall and live music venue. And that was really fun, interesting work. That was an opportunity to sort of like build and launch a brand from the ground up. So I had a really great time doing that. And that was when a recruiter called me. And again, you know, discussing like Doug, right? Like had a great connection with Doug. You know, really spent some time to get to know me. In this time, I'd met Sophie Cooper, um, who was at Robert Half, and had talked to her a bunch over time about different opportunities. And again, I felt like she was somebody who really spent the time to get to know me, because you know, I don't think I'm like a lot of other marketers. Like I've done a few different things. I have a lot of different experience, a lot of experience. And I really wanted to work on like a big brand, right? So I wanted to work on a big brand that had impact for people, that made the world a better place for people. Um, so when she called me for the job at Invest in Canada, she was like, I have the perfect job for you. And then she told me about Invest in Canada, and it was like perfect. So that's how I became the brand manager at Invest in Canada. And Invest in Canada is the arm's length government agency that's responsible for promoting Canada as a destination for foreign direct investments. Um, at the time, it was only a couple of years old. The main thing that I was tasked with when I first started investing in Canada just over 3 years ago was develop the big brand campaigns. So, you know, this was going to be about generating awareness and consideration of Canada. We work with a few of agency of records in the WPP network. And I've been doing that for like 3 years now. Had a chance to work on some fantastic campaigns, work with a fantastic group of people. And I can't say anything more to say that it's an absolute joy to do the work that I do. I'm really motivated and jacked every day to go to work, because I know that the work that we do builds the Canadian economy and delivers jobs and delivers real benefits to Canadians. So we don't get a lot of attention domestically for the work that we do. And I don't have personally any sort of issue with that, because I'm really focused on my mandate of talking to the international audience. But we've worked and been involved in a lot of the big EV battery announcements you've seen over the last few years. So the work that we do, we know has value. We know that it works, and it's really fun. In the last little bit, I've been focusing a little bit more on the sort of consideration piece, because you target countries that are in the awareness phase of the funnel for a little while. It gets to a point where they start getting into consideration, and you need a sort of different bag of tricks at that point. So I've been working on some content partnerships and working on some sort of new and innovative type projects that'll be coming out hopefully in the next few years. So it's really fun and it's really exciting, and that's how I kind of got from A to B.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's exactly what we want with the podcast, right? Just figuring out how you went from A to B and hearing your route. So I really appreciate you taking
Yeah.
time to share that with us. So what I kind of typically do with each guest is either I try to fill in the gaps or even just try to find a way for us to kind of
Mm-hmm.
go through it all. So I have a couple of questions, and we'll start
Mm-hmm.
with maybe something at the beginning. We'll work our way to where we are now. And the first one kind of goes back to when you were at Mount Allison, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know we have some guests that are in kind of the university age. Then we're
Mm-hmm.
kind of evenly split from university age, young
Mm-hmm.
professionals, and people that are kind of more mature in their career. So for those that are kind of the beginning of their career, how did you decide on, you know, I know you mentioned how you came about marketing, but what were you in initially? And then what was that moment, or rather than just the Harvard Journal, that made you realize, hey, like I need to switch right now?
Well, it was a couple of things. You start out doing Mountain A, you start out doing like a general sort of commerce, so you're exposed to everything. But I remember there were two projects I worked on at my time at Mount Allison that really stick in my mind. One was we did an advertising class where we had to sort of like develop an advertising campaign. We were assigned to the clients, like weren't real, like meaning we weren't really working with the clients. We just sort of had to develop a campaign for these brands, and my group was assigned to AGF mutual funds, and it was really fun working on that campaign, developing the creative and presenting it and everything. And the other one was I took a class where we had to do a business plan project. And while other people were doing things like chamois gloves and stuff like that, this was about 1997. And I remember specifically, we came up with the idea of 50something.com, which was going to be an internet portal for baby boomers who were starting to adopt the internet like crazy. They had money and everything like that. We were actually probably a few years ahead of our time, because we were proposing a subscription portal where we would curate content for them. I mean, again, this is before the rise of Google and all this. So search engines didn't really exist as we know them today, right? So the idea being that baby boomers could pay like $5 a month and get access to our curated content, like the links basically, right? And I remember the big thing we had to convince the class of at the time was that people were going to spend money with their credit cards on the internet. Like that was the number one problem we had, like objection we had to face from people. We built a very simplified version of a website at that point by stealing code from a bunch of other different places. Yeah, we had a spinning globe. you know and so I think it was kind of combination of a lot of those projects, I think, and getting access to them at the time. I was sort of seeing that the world around me was really changing, and it was changing quite rapidly. And I think having the opportunity to hand code HTML in the mid to late 90s was not a chance that a lot of people really sort of got. And that skill, or those, a lot of those skills were skills that I ended up using later when I was at Flow Network. We would have to do very basic sort of HTML coding to create these AOL emails. I would have to sometimes get in and fix my clients' HTML emails and stuff like that. So while I knew I didn't want to be a web developer, because I wanted to be able to do more strategy work and do more than just build emails or build websites and stuff like that, I knew that I wanted to be able to be artistic and be strategic.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like a lot of people listening, even myself, can kind of relate to that. Just, I remember back in high school, I took an entrepreneurship class and I forget what it was. It was something about the founder of Mercedes Benz. And that kind of started opening my eyes. And then in Seja, I grew up in
Yeah.
Quebec. I did a business planning class similar to yourself. And I had to come up with some type of sports apparel company of how it can help
Yeah.
athletes perform at a high rate. And I remember we were in the Dominican with my parents, and the whole week, because I was just so invested into this project, I just spent
Yeah.
the whole week on the computer building out a business plan. I still have it
Yeah.
somewhere. I think it's 98 pages. It's like this thick,
Yeah.
just a whole business plan on a fake company, and it really just brings you in and really
Yeah.
get invested into it. So
That's a big piece of advice I share with students a lot is you're never going to get an opportunity to interact with the world as a student again. And what that does is it gives you license to make mistakes.
yeah,
It gives you an opportunity to also talk to and network with people in a way that makes them not think you maybe even want a job or anything. Like when I was at UBC, so I'm in the MBA program, right? I needed to get experience marketing. I did like a marketing research project for one of the other faculties and stuff like that. I was busier in my MBA, I was busier outside the program than I was in the program. And you know what? I had profs telling me at the time that they know who the bright students are based on the questions that they ask, not their marks, and even say to me, if your marks are too high, you're not working hard enough to get a job. So, I tell people who are students, if you need to get experience, don't wait for somebody to give you that experience. And I think what's so great, what I see about students doing these days is like starting companies, even starting marketing agencies. Like there's no reason why you can't be out there doing something as a student just because you're a student. In fact, I think it gives you an advantage because when you call or contact somebody on LinkedIn just to have coffee to learn about their career, you can just say, I'm just a student looking to learn more. Right. But what you're doing is you're building your network, right? You keep in touch with these people, you stay connected to them because you never know what's going to happen down the road, right? You never know, somebody might need something and remember you. Like I say, like 150 contacts to get a job, right?
yeah,
So it's
I
very
absolutely
important.
agree with all of that. Where
Yeah.
I kind of noticed I was in accounting initially, then I switched over to marketing.
Yeah.
I kind of had a panic attack, right? Where I was
Yeah.
like, hey, I don't have a network. I don't know anything or anyone in the space. So I kind of went full court press for that. And I kind of did the exact thing you're saying, where I went to everyone and said, hey, I'm a student. I just want to pick your brain. And to be honest, people were so generous where I remember someone Hayden Cash
Yeah.
and where I told him we had coffee. I
Yeah.
told him what I was interested in, and he's like, "Oh, you know what? I have I don't know if I can say this, but it's been a couple of years now. I have a meeting with a client that you might be interested if that's something you want to work with." He's like, "Come be my intern for the day and kind of sit in the meeting."
Yeah.
And then just hearing everything, I told him after that meeting, I was like, I felt like I learned more in that
Mhm.
1 hour meeting than I did a whole semester in a class that touches on that topic. Right. And then
Yeah.
from there, I kind of just started developing some random projects just to kind of get my hands in things. And
Mhm.
like you're saying, just because you were a student, you're able to kind of try it. And it's some of the best experience I probably had to date, just in regards to trying, failing, and kind of moving on from there. So I think those are some great points
I
you
mean, the
touched on.
cost of failure will never be lower than when you're a student,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And when you consider the other piece of advice, because I mentor MBA students still, and one of the things I tell them all the time is, the library resources you have access to as a student, do you know what those are worth to the private sector or to the business people? They would have to pay 30 grand a year to get access to some of those databases. So if you're smart as a student in marketing, you go and find companies that need research projects done and you say, let me do a research project for you. Now,
Yeah.
if you need a bit of money to be able to do that, fine. If you don't, you don't. But I'm just saying, like, look at the tools you have at your disposal and use those to your advantage, right?
Yeah, no, that's very interesting you say that because I find maybe some of the tips and tricks you're saying kind of touches on some of my experience well, where
Yeah.
I remember in university, even, what, 5 years ago or more than that, they'd give you the option, right? Do you want to do a case study or do you want to work with an actual client? And you'd go find it. I remember I had friends in my class. I was trying to convince them, hey, come on my team. We'll go find an organization to do something for us. We can get real experience. Like, "Oh, I don't know, Chris. That's going to take a lot of time and all that." And I was like, oh, fair enough. But I ended up working with someone and they liked it. And when I started my marketing agency, they ended up becoming a client of mine. So that was kind of a cool full circle moment. So I absolutely
Exactly.
agree with that. Um,
Sometimes people bristle a bit when I say marks don't matter, but the
yeah, no,
reality is, like, the smartest person in the class is not always the one with the job on the other end,
yeah. I
right?
to be honest, just touching on that, I still remember this. This is one of the craziest experiences I had in university. We were in an entrepreneurship class and really cool class where we did a lot of group stuff. So very hands on. And everyone was pretty bright, right? And we did a project. Everyone did their part, and I thought it was very well, like more than enough what needed to be done.
Mhm.
And someone in my group stayed up the whole night just touching up, redoing, and saying, "Hey, like I need to make sure I get an A plus. I need an A plus on this paper." And the paper was easily an 85, I'd say. So it'd be an
Mhm.
A in Ottawa, U Ottawa. And she stayed up making sure that we got a couple extra percent. And you could tell that she was so tired that her eyes were twitching and she was trying to get a job at Shopify, but you could tell she was just getting burnt out because she was just asking for those extra percentages and wasn't being able to kind of form a network. So I still remember that.
Yeah.
And it was kind
The
of crazy.
teachers always know who the smart students are by the quality of the questions they ask in class. So
Yeah.
another piece of advice I always give students is get a subscription to something like The Economist. A
Mhm.
family friend of mine bought me a subscription to The Economist when I was doing my MBA, and I would read that like every week, and I was always be super prepared for any type of conversation that would come up in class.
Yeah.
So get yourself a great subscription to something of like The Economist or something and start
Mhm.
reading it so you can have a bit of an idea of what's going on in the world, because those things affect business, right? Those
Absolutely.
things, for example, like, you might be doing some campaign work and costs are going up, right? And you're like, well, my CPMs are going up, but you understand, like, if your CPMs were going up in Q4 of last year, it's probably because every B2C retailer, maybe even B2B company, was trying to squeeze as much juice out of they could out of last fiscal year,
Yeah.
because they were trying to get all the money they could, because there's, a lot of economic uncertainty coming up for this year, right? So I think, like, understanding what's going on around you is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess then kind of building that and relating back to your route, um, it sounds like just having that knowledge base and even just building your network was a major part of your career. And I think one of the things that kind of stood out to me when you were sharing your route was when you moved back to Ottawa, right? Kind of in that scenario where like, hey, I had no network, you're kind of starting from scratch. So do you mind maybe touching on that? And I think that'd be a great point
Yeah.
for those at the
So
beginning of their career that are trying to expand their network for those listening.
So here's what I tell people actually about Ottawa, but I'll touch a bit on Toronto and Vancouver, because I've worked in all three and networked in all three of those places. Ottawa's a handshake town. Ottawa, you have to spend a lot of time getting to know people personally before you can start to talk business. Everybody knows each other here. It's a bit less formal. Toronto, on the other hand, is more transactional, and to be honest with you, they both have advantages, right? You meet somebody in Toronto, and I think you can sort of get this sense that they're trying to figure out what the connection is, right? Like, can we do business together? Can this person help me? Can I help them? You're trying to get to that quite quickly, and it's a little bit more efficient. Where Ottawa and Vancouver's also like Ottawa in that sense, they're handshake towns. So I tell people when they're networking in Ottawa specifically, go out and just meet people and understand that it's going to take time, because you need to get to know them personally, right? But like I say, a lot of the people I met back in 2010 are friends of mine now, and we're still in contact and we talk frequently and see each other frequently. um, and you just never know where things are going to lead. But understand the where you are, right? Like, and just understand that Ottawa is not Toronto, right? So Toronto may be a little bit faster to get to certain things. Ottawa, just know it's going to be a bit more of a slog. So don't be so pushy. Don't understand the context that they need to get to know you. They need to see you around a bit. They need to see you at events frequently, and then they'll get a sense. Okay, this person's like serious. They know what they want to do, and then they'll help you. So I think that's a really important concept about networking that I think a lot of people maybe don't know about Ottawa, but I think you can use that to your advantage, right? Another little tidbit I'll give you about networking in Ottawa is a lot of, because I went to like every event for years, right? Um, and what I learned after a little bit was that if you really want to get to the decision makers in Ottawa, you probably need to look at charity events, right? um, I think there's a lot of great places to meet people in Ottawa, but the reality is you'll probably be talking to manager level people that aren't always the decision makers. So I kept asking myself, like, where's the owner? Where are the owners? Like, where are the uh, um, where are the decision makers here? They're going to charity events, because the reality is in Ottawa, the community of people that can give to charity and do give to charity is small, right? And it's all those same people at the same events. The other thing I learned too is like volunteering, right? Like in my volunteer things that I did, like Computers for Communities or Abbey Fieldhouse, like I would be able to out there meeting people at other organizations like Habitat for Humanity and stuff along those lines, because we'd be talking to them about partnerships and stuff like that. That's a great way to meet people. And the last thing I'll tell people about Ottawa is political volunteering. Engage with politicians, get active politically, not just for political reasons or whatever, but again, that's where you're going to meet a lot of decision makers and a lot of influential people. And don't be afraid to reach out to your local MPP or your local MP. Introduce yourself, talk to them, because you know what? The MPPs and the MPs in this area, they're talking to the business community, and the business community is talking to them. City councilors, all that stuff. You never know. Some business owner might say to them casually, I am having a hard time finding this type of person or something like that. And you never know, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great tip that maybe people, as you mentioned, wouldn't
Yep.
initially just have off the top of their head. And I guess one of the other questions I have about your route before we kind of get to those questions I like to ask every guest at the end is, I think one of the things you touched on was, some of the economic downturns you had to go through,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Right, like the dot-com crash,
Yep.
2008, and then just
Yep.
in Ottawa, I think you said
Yep.
2015, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So, if you don't mind, do you mind maybe touching on that, right? Because obviously that's something where
Oh, yeah.
a lot of times when people go through those periods, they have to like recreate themselves, reinvent themselves, or
Yep.
kind of reposition. How are you
Yep.
able to kind of manage, let's say, three economic downturns or three recessions where you kind of had to find your way again and make some ground?
Well, I think there's two things, right? Like one, obviously your network and having those network skills are super important because you're going to need them eventually. And the other thing is like having a really good sense of like who you are, what you're good at, and what you want to do, right? You do have to maybe be flexible, to stay out there and stay working and stuff like that. But I think understanding like who you are and what you can bring to an organization, and what your sort of like first 90 days are going to look like or something is super important, because people get really risk averse coming out of these types of situations or while they're in them. And you need to be able to um, have them be confident that you're the right person for them, that's going to help them grow or weather the storm or whatever. But the last thing I'll say about the economic shocks thing, it's no secret, like they're getting more frequent and they're getting bigger and they're going to happen more and more. So I think it's one of the single most important skills everybody's going to need in the next 20 years, because I think there's going to be more of them. I mean, right? I dealt with like the .com like '03, then '08, then 2015. You could say almost another one even recently. Like they're going to start happening more and more. Um, so I think people are going to have to to develop a good head in their shoulders and get ready for them, right? Never assume
Yeah.
that you're going to be in the job you're in forever. So always
Yeah.
keep up your network, right? Like
No,
always
for sure.
keep your resume up to date and be ready,
Yeah. No,
because
absolutely.
you know you don't always get like a lot of notice. You might start hear rumblings like, oh, things aren't maybe going
Yeah.
so well. I hear revenues are down, and then you'll get a call 2 weeks later that you're getting laid off. So
Yeah.
always be ready.
No, I think that's another great tip. And yeah, I guess the way that I kind of like to do the route typically, right? We kind of go through it, maybe brush on some things there. And then just to kind of wrap it all up, I have two questions I like to ask
Yeah.
every guest. So obviously we went from A to B, as you mentioned.
Mhm.
And what this is episode 156. And I've been
Mhm.
saying it 156 times
Yeah.
now. I'm going to live until I'm 103. I'm going to be on a rocking chair thinking about all the things I've done to my career.
Mhm.
And when I'm on that chair,
Mhm.
I'm gonna hopefully remember all the cool things or all the unique things that would just make me go, "Wow, I can't believe I got to do that." Right?
Mhm.
So let's put Danny in the same position. You're 103, you're on a rocking chair, thinking about all the things you've done throughout your career to date. What's maybe one story so far that when you're in that rocking chair, you're gonna remember that and be like, "Wow, I can't believe that happened."
Well, that's tough because I've been doing this like over 20 years now. And I like to say that I've almost seen everything. And in fact, sometimes something bad will happen. And if it's something I'll never seen had happened before, I'll laugh instead of getting angry because I'll be like, wow. You know what I mean? I've seen almost it all and I've never seen this. But, I think really based on where I'm at now, I think having the opportunity to promote Canada is really like a dream come true. I feel so fortunate to be in this position. There's not many people globally that get the chance to promote a country. Um, so I just feel so fortunate. So unless something changes really when I look back, I know I'll remember this time. And, I'm really proud of this country, and to be able to share the benefits of Canada with the world is really a once in a lifetime opportunity that I'm sure I'll never forget.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Not many people get that opportunity, and it's quite um, unique that you're able to do so. So that's amazing.
Yeah,
And I guess the last question I now have. So we went into the future. You're 103
yeah,
years old.
yeah,
Now let's hop in our time machine. Let's go
yeah.
back to 16, 17, 18-year-old Danny, who's about to walk on campus for
Mhm.
university for the first time. Let's say you're able to have a conversation with a younger self. What's maybe one piece of advice that you've now learned that if you had the chance to talk to your younger self, you'd be
Yeah.
like, "Hey, Danny, this is something you need to know."
Well, one thing that was interesting about doing my MBA was I did sort of get an opportunity to be a student again. And I was a much different student as an MBA student than I was as an undergrad. As an undergrad, I did my work and I did what I had to do, and I had a lot of fun and all that kind of stuff. But when I was an MBA, when I was in my MBA, I was really serious and dedicated. And I think what I would tell myself heading into university, if I was to able to talk to myself at that time again, is I would say, like, you don't understand how amazing of an opportunity to be a university student it is, really, right? You get 3 4 years, 5 years, however long you're in university for. Like, really dive in, like, experience a lot, talk to the profs a lot, use the library resources a lot, like, uh, um, really lean into your university education. I do think that you don't always learn current sort of marketing and programs, although we all know some ways that's changed a lot more, because I see programs bringing, like, things where you can like manage an AdWords, Google Ads account, like in your class. Like, all that stuff's great. I would say take as much out of that as you possibly can, because I think, like I said a few times already, you're never going to get that opportunity probably to be a student again. And when you really think about the resources you have access to in terms of your profs, library, other students, all that kind of stuff, get as much out of it as you can.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think I agree with that full heartedly. I remember when I was in university, I didn't really realize it until my last year, right? When you had that
Yeah.
opportunity to kind of leverage it all, right? Where even if people are listening, they go to the website or the podcast page for us. That's actually a website that was given to everyone in this digital marketing class,
Yes.
and we got
Yes.
to build out a whole site. And as soon as I graduated, I just repositioned it, branded it as my own, and
Yeah.
I'm using it.
So
What?
I started
Yeah.
I started that exact same thing inside the MBA program at UBC. I started a
Mhm.
blog on Blogger on my own time and used
Oh,
that to learn about sort of blogging and content creation and SEO,
yeah,
and had so much fun doing it, and it was such a great experience. I would go into internship interviews or like the Laplink interview, and they'd be like, "So what are you doing?" And I wouldn't even start by saying I'm studying XYZ. I'd say
yeah,
I've started a blog on my own, hooked it up to Google Analytics, and I'm learning SEO. And I've learned this over the last like 6 months, right?
yeah,
I've done these volunteer projects with these faculties in market research. And then 10 minutes later, I would start talking about class or something like
yeah.
that, right?
No, it's
So I
it's
think that's
incredibly
amazing.
impactful, right? Where you
Yep.
just have the opportunity to do that, and I've been taking notes when I have kids, or even with my little cousin going to university soon. I have so many things I want to tell her, or even my future kids of like, hey, make sure you do this in school. But I think that's a great way to end the podcast, and just want to thank you for coming on. And
No
that's
problem.
it for episode 156, and we'll see everyone next week.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much for having me, Chris. Take care.
Absolutely.